I'm John Rodgers, and today I represent the Portage Trail group of the Sierra Club. Our subject today is The Turning Point, a tribute to Rachel Carson. And in order to introduce this subject properly, I have with me today my wife, Eleanor, and her voice will indicate that those are the exact words of Rachel Carson, and I will do all the interlinking commentary.
To stand at the edge of the sea, to sense the ebb and the flow of the tides, to feel the breath of the moving over a great salt marsh, to watch the flight of shorebirds that have swept up and down the surf lines of the continents for untold thousands of years, to see the running of the old eels and the young shad to the sea, and to have knowledge of things that are as nearly eternal as an earthly life can be. These things were before ever man stood on the shore of the ocean and looked out upon it with wonder. They continue year in, year out, through the centuries and the ages, while man's kingdoms rise and fall.
Those opening words are from Rachel Carson's first book, Under the Sea Wind. And this tribute is to Rachel Carson, a woman who was gentle as a soft New England fog, sensitive as the tiny sea creatures she so glowingly described, persistent as barnacles clinging to a rock, enduring as the rock being pounded by the sea, and dedicated and brilliant. If you ever wonder what strikes people and propels them into one path or another, consider these final words from Locksley Hall by Tennyson. For the mighty wind arises, roaring seaward, and I go. On a night in her dorm in college, in the Pittsburgh area, when she had never seen the ocean, those words burned into Rachel Carson's mind, and she knew her destiny was tied to the sea. Biology was her field, and marine zoology came naturally, given her ties to the ocean. She had problems deciding between that field and writing, and we are fortunate that she combined the two. The Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole on Cape Cod, and especially its library, and that's what you're looking at, had an early and lifelong impact on her. Her words, especially in the sea books, are always a giveaway that she was a part of that which she described, even if only for a moment.
The island lay in shadows only a little deeper than those that were swiftly stealing across the sound from the east. On its western shore, the wet sand of the narrow beach caught the same reflection of palely gleaming sky that laid a bright path across the water from island beach to horizon. Both water and sand were the color of steel overlaid with a sheen of silver, so that it was hard to say where water ended and land began.
Those words, like the opening words, are from Under the Sea Wind, an excellent book that was published at the worst possible time, just before the United States entered World War II. But 10 years later, Rachel Carson was still writing about islands.
Islands have always fascinated the human mind. Perhaps it is the instinctive response of man, the land animal, welcoming a brief intrusion of Earth in the vast, overwhelming expanse of sea. Here in a great ocean basin, 1,000 miles from the nearest continent, with miles of water under our vessel, we came upon an island. Our imaginations can follow its slopes down through darkening waters to where it rests on the seafloor. We wonder why and how it arose here in the midst of the ocean.
That passage is from The Sea Around Us, a book which stayed on the bestseller list for 86 weeks. In that book, she used the presence of a barren, newly created island to convey a sense of the timelessness of nature in this passage.
So deliberate, so unhurried, so inexorable are the ways of nature that the restocking of the island may require thousands or millions of years. It may be that no more than half a dozen times in all these eons does a particular form, such as a tortoise, make a successful landing upon its shores. To wonder impatiently why man is not a constant witness of such arrivals is to fail to understand the majestic pace of the process.
And my pine tree and raccoon would come along much later than what Rachel Carson has spoken about. One of Rachel Carson's favorite places was the zone between the low and high tide line. This area is one of Earth's most demanding living places, and the adaptation of the creatures between the tide lines to harsh conditions is a necessary feature of survival.
The creatures of the world between the tide lines are known to only a handful of people. Because they are so different from the familiar land animals, it is almost impossible to recreate them in words alone. Fortunately, the animals of the sea edge, both the easterly seen and those of microscopic size, are perfect material for photographic purposes. I can think of no part of the Earth inhabited by animals of equal beauty, or by creatures whose habits are more fascinating, and those adaptations to the world about them are more significant. It is part of a paradox of the sea that, while its creatures are so strangely unfamiliar, they present a demonstration of the essential nature and meaning of life that is unequaled in simple perfection and clarity.
Rachel Carson speaks quite often of exploring the shore at night. It conveys a sense of aloneness without being lonely. She never seemed to be lonely when she was near the ocean.
The shore at night is a different world in which the very darkness that hides and distractions of daylight brings into sharper focus the elemental realities. Once exploring the night beach, I surprised a small ghost crab in the searching beam of my torch. He was lying in a pit he had dug just above the surf, as though watching the sea and waiting. The blackness of the night possessed water, air, and beach. It was the darkness of an older world before man. There was no sound but the all-enveloping primeval sound of wind blowing over water and sand, and of waves crashing on the beach. Soon I found the tracks of a shorebird, probably a sanderling, and followed them a little. Then they turned toward the water and were lost, for the tide here had erased them and made them as though they had never been. Looking out over the cove, I felt a strong sense of the interchangeability of land and sea and its marginal world of the shore, and of the links between the life of the two. There was also an awareness of the past and of the continuing flow of time, obliterating much that had gone before, as the sea and that morning washed away the tracks of the bird.
But she recognized something in the sea that most of us do not, because we see it as a suntan vacation land, put there only for our pleasure. Her viewpoint was quite different.
The shore seems many things to many people, of its varied moods, and one usually considered typical is not so at all. The true spirit of the sea does not reside in the gentle surf that laps a sun-drenched bathing beach on a summer day. Instead, it is a lonely shore at dawn or twilight, or in storm or midnight darkness, that we sense a mysterious something we recognize as a reality of the sea. For the ocean has nothing to do with humanity. It is supremely unaware of man, and when we carry too many of the trappings of human existence with us to the threshold of the sea world, our ears are dulled and we do not hear the accents of sublimity in which it speaks.
It's hard to comprehend the struggle Rachel Carson went through to enable those words to hit your ears so smoothly and yet retain their impact. She spoke of writing as a lonely whirl involving only the writer and the subject. Sometimes she seemed to know too much about the subject to ever convey its essence to the people who were her audience.
Everywhere the wind and the sea have shaped the coast, sculpturing it into forms that are often beautiful, sometimes bizarre. Along the Oregon coast, the rocky cliffs and headlands speak of the age-long battle with the sea. Here and there, a lonely tower of rock rises offshore, one of the formations known as stacks or needles. Each of these begins as a narrow headland isolated from the main body of the coastal rock. Then a weak spot of its connection with the mainland was found and battered through. Here and there, the assaults of surf have blasted out caves in the sea cliffs. Anemone Cave of Acadia National Park is one. In the famous sea lion caves on the southern Oregon coast, a herd of several hundred sea lions gathers each autumn, living in the tumultuous surge of the surf, mingling its roars with the sound of the sea, still at work to break through the roof of the cave. Back from the surf line, the winds have here and there piled up majestic dunes. At Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, perhaps the highest dunes of the American coast rise abruptly from the sea.
In this next passage, she speaks of an ancient creature, the horseshoe crab, and its use of the timing of tide cycles to hatch its eggs in the sand. The horseshoe crab has highly sensitive, bright blue blood, which is used in the laboratory detection of poisonous endotoxins.
Not all of the high tides of the next moon cycle will reach this spot, for the water moments vary in strength at the moon's quarters and weakest of all. A month after the egg laying, the embryos will be ready for life. Then the high tides of another full moon will wash away the sand of the nest. The turbulence of the rising tide will cause the egg membranes to split, releasing the young crabs to a life of their own over the shallow shores of bays and sounds. But how do the parent crabs foresee these events? What is there in this primitive, lumbering creature that tells it that the moon is full and that tides are running high? And what tells it that the security of its eggs will somehow be enhanced and the nests are dug and the eggs deposited on these stronger tides of the moon's cycle? Tonight, in this setting of full moon and pressing tide, the shore speaks of life in a mysterious and magical way. Here is the sea and the land's edge. Here is the creature that has known such seas and shores for eons of time, while the stream of evolution swept on, leaving it almost untouched since the days of tribal bites. The horseshoe crabs in their being obliterate the barrier of time.
The creature she spoke about has been on this earth for about 230 million years, almost unchanged. Rachel Carson and a friend, Marie Rodell, went out on a trawler, a fishing boat, for 10 days in order that she would have sufficient background to write for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Here are two of her observations.
Then one sees the slender shapes of sharks moving into the kill. There is something very beautiful about these sharks to me, and when some of the men got out rifles and killed them for sport, it really hurt me. When I stood on the afterdeck on those dark nights in a tiny man-made island of wood and steel, dimly seeing the great shapes of waves that rolled about us, I think I was conscious as never before that ours is a water world dominated by the immensity of the sea.
Rachel Carson had been convinced that she must participate in some sort of undersea activity before she finished The Sea Around Us. She settled for a dive in Florida that took her down to about 15 feet.
There I learned what the surface of the water looks like from underneath and how exquisitely delicate and varied are the colors displayed by the animals of the reef. And I got the feeling of the misty green vistas of a strange, non-human world.
Though her field was the sea, her writings often exhibited the concept of ecology. She was even writing in such tones for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Now this first slide will be Lake Erie from one of the NASA moonshots.
The Western Hemisphere has a relatively short history of the exploitation of its natural resources by man. This history, though short, contains many chapters of reckless waste and appalling destruction. Entire species of animals have been exterminated or reduced to so small a remnant that their survival is doubtful. A remnant that their survival. Forests have been despoiled by uncontrolled and excessive cutting of lumber. Grasslands have been destroyed by overgrazing. These and other practices have affected us with all the evils of soil erosion, floods, destruction of horticultural lands, and loss of wildlife habitats. Oh boy.
You're looking at some carp in the Cuyahoga River. The Cuyahoga River is much cleaner now, and there's less pollution, so there are fewer carp, but they're still there.
We in the United States have been slow to learn that our wildlife, like other forms of natural wealth, must be vigorously protected if we are to continue to enjoy its benefits. The present generation has seen the awakening of a vital conservation sentiment.
Then moving over to an article published in Holiday as The Ever-Changing Shore, she continues the theme.
To convert some of the wild areas that remain into state and national parks is only part of the answer. However, even public parks are not what nature created over the eons of time, working with wind and wave and sand. Somewhere we should know what was nature's way. We should know that the earth would have been had not man interfered. And so, besides public parks for recreation, we should set aside some of the wilderness areas of seashore, where the relations of sea and wind and shore, of living things and their physical world, remain as they have been over the long vistas of time in which man did not exist. For there remains in the space-age universe the possibility that man's way is not always best.
Prior to the actual article, she had written these words, the voice of one crying in the wilderness.
The dismal truth is that shores such as we are proposing to describe are vast disappearing and may well do so completely within the life of some of us. This is not alarmist speculation, but a conclusion based on recent factual surveys and predictions by those qualified to know. Only vision, understanding, and bold action can better the situation. Feeling this so deeply as I do, I cannot write about the shores I love without pointing out their peril, even though briefly, for it is only as people are informed of dangers that threaten such priceless regions that they can be saved.
The reason for two of those pictures, one of them was Long Island, and I wanted to indicate dumping offshore. The other was the Welland Canal, and it was through the Welland Canal that the lamprey eel got into the Great Lakes. We do all kinds of things that change the ball game for Mother Nature. And then this sensitive woman moved into a project that was to pit her against the whole pesticide industry and many allied fields. She began the work that culminated in Silent Spring. What prompted Rachel Carson to take on this massive endeavor? Here is her reply to a friend's letter dealing with the death of songbirds and the survival of mosquitoes after aerial spraying.
I realized that here was the material for a book. What I discovered was that everything which meant most to me as a naturalist was being threatened, and that nothing I could do would be more important. However, I wanted to do more than merely express concern. I wanted to demonstrate that concern was well-founded.
She realized that the problems she faced were great.
It is a great problem to know how to penetrate the barrier of public indifference and unwillingness to look at unpleasant facts that might have to be dealt with if one recognized their existence. I have no idea whether I shall be able to do so or not, but knowing what I do, I have no choice but to set it down to be read by those who will. I guess my own principal reliance is in marshaling all the facts and letting them largely speak for themselves.
And I used Las Vegas to indicate this problem that she had in getting to the people that would later have to do something about this pollution. Somewhere in the process of putting the book together, Rachel Carson was finally able to express herself with these words.
I have a comforting feeling that what I shall now be able to achieve is a synthesis of widely scattered facts that have not heretofore been considered in relation to each other. It is now possible to build up, step by step, a really damning case against the use of these chemicals as they are now inflicted upon us.
And the significance of the bald eagles were, when her writing took place dealing with Silent Spring, the bald eagle was getting wiped out by the chemical DDT. Now, some of this is a little heavy, and I like lighthouses, so I'm interjecting lighthouses as a little break here and there. This is the Hatteras light on the Outer Banks. She had quite a bit to say about those chemicals in Silent Spring.
The new chemicals come from our laboratories in an endless stream. Almost 500 annually find their way into actual use in the United States alone. The figure is staggering, and its implications are not easily grasped. 500 new chemicals to which the bodies of men and animals are required somehow to adapt each year. Chemicals totally outside the limits of biologic experience. I contend, furthermore, that we have allowed these chemicals to be used with little or no advance investigation of their effect on soil, water, wildlife, and man himself. Future generations are unlikely to condone our lack of prudent concern for the integrity of the natural world that supports all life.
And here's a paragraph that the pesticide industry chose to completely ignore.
It is not my contention that chemical insecticides must never be used. I do contend that we have put poisonous and biologically potent chemicals indiscriminately into the hands of persons largely or wholly ignorant of their potentials for harm. We have subjected enormous numbers of people to contact with these poisons without their consent and often without their knowledge.
And here is one of the Bill Malden cartoons, another such victory, and I am undone. She was speaking about both the pesticide industry and various government agencies when she wrote these words.
When the public protests, confronted with some of the various evidence of damaging results of pesticide applications, it is fed little tranquilizing pills of half-truth. We urgently need an end to these false assurances, to the sugar-coating of unpalatable facts. It is the public that is being asked to assume the risks that the insect controllers calculate. In the words of Jean Rostand, the obligation to endure gives us the right to know.
And this is the old lighthouse at Charleston, South Carolina. She went on to explain in Silent Spring, and then further in a letter, about the futility of many chemical control measures.
By their very nature, chemical controls are self-defeating, for they have been devised and applied without taking into account the complex biological systems against which they have been blindly hurled. The reason I say they are self-defeating is that insect populations very quickly develop resistance to chemical sprays. This nullifies all we are trying to accomplish by spraying. In the end, we find we have gone to considerable expense and trouble for nothing. We have killed off or endangered fish, birds, and other wildlife, contaminated vegetables and fruits, damaged shrubbery and flowers, and introduced poisonous chemicals into soil and water supplies. After all this, we find the mosquito has the last laugh, for while we have been progressively poisoning our own environment, the mosquito has been breeding a superior race composed of individuals that are immune to chemical attack.
The reason for the seagull statue, this is in Temple Square in Salt Lake City, and the seagulls saved the Mormons by attacking the locusts, or the grasshoppers really, that were killing the crop. And just before this, I showed a few pictures of desirable use things like milky spore and the ladybugs, and Diptol, one of the organic insecticides. And now I want to show you a picture of that mosquito that Rachel was talking about. Then back to words from Silent Spring.
Two critically important facts that have been overlooked in designing the modern insect control programs. The first is that the really effective control of insects is that applied by nature, not by man. The second neglected fact is the truly explosive power of a species to reproduce once the resistance of the environment has been weakened. The trouble is that we are seldom aware of the protection afforded by natural enemies until it fails. Most of us walk unseen through the world, unaware alike of its beauties, its wonders, and the strange and sometimes terrible intensity of the lives that are being lived about us.
And here's our own Marblehead Light here in Ohio. Rachel Carson had a strong sense of the long periods required in the development of the earth. She spoke of the ages required for the population of an island to become established, and we've already spoken a little bit about that. She also had a sensitivity to the continuity of certain species through time immemorial. She speaks here about a predator that has been successful over millions of years and is still one of nature's controls.
Everywhere, in field and hedgerow and garden and forest, the insect predators and parasites are at work. Here, above a pond, the dragonflies dart and the sun strikes fire from their wings. So their ancestors sped through swamps where huge reptiles lived.
Rachel Carson, like John Muir, had a few choice words for those who felt everything that is for man.
The control of nature is a phrase conceived in arrogance, born of the Neanderthal age of biology and philosophy, when it was supposed that nature exists for the convenience of man. The concepts and practices of applied etymology, for the most part, date from that stone age of science. It is our alarming misfortune that so primitive a science has armed itself with the most modern and terrible weapons, and that in turning them against the insects, it has also turned them against the earth.
And this is the Cape May, New Jersey lighthouse. Those are the closing words of Silent Spring. The last chapter is entitled The Other Road. And this last quote from Silent Spring skips back into that chapter to speak of that other road.
We stand now where two roads diverge, but unlike the roads in Robert Frost's familiar poem, They are not equally fair. The road we have long been traveling is deceptively easy, a smooth superhighway on which we progress with great speed. But at its end lies disaster. The other fork of the road, the one less traveled by, differs our only chance to reach a destination that assures the preservation of our earth. The choice, after all, is ours to make. If having endured much, we have at last asserted our right to know, and if knowing we have concluded that we are being asked to take the counsel of those who tell us that we must fill our world with poisonous chemicals, we should look about and see what other course is open to us.
About Silent Spring, Rachel Carson wrote,
I myself never thought the ugly facts would dominate, and I hope they don't. The beauty of the living world I was trying to save has always been uppermost in my mind. That and anger in the senseless, brutish things that were being done. I have felt bound by a solemn obligation to do what I could. If I didn't at least try, I could never again be happy in nature. But now I can believe I have at last helped a little. It would be unrealistic to believe one book could bring a complete change.
now you're going to see